The woman standing at the edge of Ogden Trading Post looked like she might collapse at any moment, her hand pressed against the rough wooden beam for support, as the autumn wind of 1882 swept dust devils across the rutted road. Grace Novak was 22 years old, 5 months pregnant, and utterly alone in a territory that showed no mercy to the desperate. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, tangled from days of travel, and her once fine dress bore the stains of hard miles and harder tears. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memory of how she got it still made her flinch when men walked too close. She had been standing there for 3 hours, watching wagons come and go, watching families load supplies and head out toward their homesteads, watching the sun climb higher in the crystalline Utah sky. Nobody had offered help. Nobody had even asked if she needed it. A pregnant woman alone was either trouble or tragedy, and frontier folk had learned to steer clear of both. The trading post behind her was a squat building of weathered timber and stone, its porch sagging under the weight of too many seasons. Inside, the proprietor had made it clear she could not linger. She had no money for lodging, no family to claim her, and her condition made her an inconvenience at best. So she stood outside, one hand on her swollen belly, the other clutching a carpet bag that held everything she owned in this world. The baby kicked, a flutter against her palm that would have made her smile in different circumstances. Instead, tears pricked her eyes. What kind of mother brought a child into this? What kind of future awaited them both? A horse approached from the north, moving at an easy canter that spoke of a rider in no particular hurry. Grace did not look up at first. She had learned not to make eye contact, not to invite attention. But the hoofbeats slowed, then stopped directly in front of her, and she could not help but glance up. The man astride the buckskin gelding was perhaps 25, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of river stone. He wore a dusty black hat, pushed back on his head, revealing brown hair in need of a trim, and his face held the weathered quality of someone who spent more time under open sky than under roof. A revolver hung at his hip, well worn but well maintained, and his clothes spoke of a working cowboy rather than a drifter. There was something careful in the way he looked at her, something that made Grace think he was actually seeing her, rather than just looking through her the way most people did. He shifted in his saddle, leather creaking, and his voice when he spoke was low and even, carrying a hint of concern that caught Grace off guard. "Afternoon, miss? You waiting on someone?" Grace opened her mouth to say yes, to invent a husband or brother who would be along any moment, but the lie died in her throat. She was so tired of lying, so tired of pretending, so tired of carrying this weight alone. "No," she said instead, her voice barely above a whisper. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, his gaze taking in her condition, her bruised face, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "You look like you could use some water, maybe a place to sit down." The proprietor made it clear, "I am not welcome to stay." Grace heard the bitterness in her own voice and hated it, but she could not seem to help it. The man's jaw tightened, and he swung down from his horse with practiced ease. Up close, Grace could see he stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and strong in the way of men who made their living with their hands. But his movements were gentle as he pulled his canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. "Name is Marcus Jameson," he said. "I work at the Double R Ranch, about 10 miles west of here. Came into town for supplies." Grace took the canteen with trembling hands, suddenly aware of how parched she was. The water was warm but clean, and she drank deeply before forcing herself to stop and hand it back. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Marcus is fine." He hooked the canteen back on his saddle, then turned to face her fully. "Now, I do not mean to pry into your business, miss, but you look like you have had a rough time of it. Is there someone I can fetch for you? Someone who can help?" The simple kindness in his question nearly broke her. Grace felt her eyes well up, felt her carefully constructed composure crack like sun-baked earth. "There is no one," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and Grace saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. "Where are you headed?" he asked, though the question seemed almost rhetorical given what she had just told him. "I have nowhere," Grace repeated, louder this time, as if saying it again might make it more real, might force the world to acknowledge her impossible situation. "My husband threw me out 3 weeks ago, said the baby was not his. It is, but he would not listen, would not hear anything I had to say. He gave me $50 and told me if I ever came back, he would kill me. I believed him. Marcus's face darkened. A man who would do that to his wife is no man at all. He was not always like that. Grace heard herself defending him and stopped, disgusted with her own instinct to make excuses. Actually, maybe he was. I just did not see it until it was too late. The cowboy was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. Around them, the trading post continued its afternoon business. A freight wagon pulled up, and the driver began unloading crates. 2 women in bonnets emerged from the store, baskets over their arms, gossiping in low voices that cut off when they saw Grace. She felt their judgment like a physical thing and turned her face away. "Listen," Marcus said finally, his voice decisive. "I cannot in good conscience leave you here like this. The foreman at the Double R is a decent man, and his wife is even better. They might have work for you, or at least know someone who does. You are welcome to ride out there with me if you are willing to take the chance on a stranger." Grace looked up at him, searching his face for signs of ulterior motive, for the catch she knew had to be coming. But his expression was open, earnest in a way that seemed almost out of place in this harsh country. "Why would you help me?" "Because someone should." Marcus said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Because you need help, and I am here. And what kind of person would I be if I just rode away?" Something in Grace's chest loosened, just a fraction. "I have no money to pay you." "Did not ask for any." Marcus glanced at his horse, then back at her. "Buck here is strong enough to carry double for 10 miles, though it will not be comfortable, but it beats standing here until nightfall, and you look about ready to drop." Grace knew she should be more cautious. She knew that accepting help from strange men often led to situations far worse than the ones you were trying to escape. But she also knew that she had no other options. That night was coming, and she had nowhere to sleep, and no food to eat, and a baby growing inside her that needed her to survive. Sometimes you had to take a leap of faith, even when you had no faith left. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you, Marcus." He nodded and moved to help her mount, his hands careful and respectful as he steadied her. Grace settled herself in the saddle, awkward with her swollen belly, and Marcus swung up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, not touching her more than necessary, but providing a solid presence at her back. She could feel the heat of him through her dress, could smell horse and leather and honest sweat. It should have made her uncomfortable, but instead, she felt something she had not felt in weeks: safe. They rode out of Ogden as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The landscape spread before them in shades of gold and amber, the autumn grasses rippling in the wind like waves on a dry sea. To the east, the Wasatch Range rose in sharp peaks, already dusted with early snow. To the west, the land rolled away toward the Great Salt Lake, visible as a shimmer on the distant horizon. Marcus kept the horse to an easy walk, mindful of Grace's condition. He did not press her with questions, did not demand her story, just rode in companionable silence while Grace tried to process this unexpected turn of events. She had been so certain that her story would end badly, that she would die alone and forgotten in some roadside ditch with her baby unborn. The fact that someone had stopped, that someone had cared enough to offer help, felt almost surreal. "You from around here?" Marcus asked after a while, his voice low near her ear. "Salt Lake City originally," Grace said. "I met my husband there 2 years ago. He was a banker, seemed respectable. My parents were so pleased when he proposed. They said I was lucky to catch such a good match." The bitterness was back in her voice, sharp as alkali. "They were wrong. What happened, if you do not mind my asking?" Grace was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. "He was kind at first, attentive. Then we married and everything changed. He would fly into rages over nothing. A meal prepared wrong, a shirt not pressed to his liking. He hit me for the first time 3 months after our wedding. Apologized after, said it would never happen again. But it did, again and again." She felt Marcus tense behind her, but he said nothing, just let her talk. "When I found out I was pregnant, I thought maybe it would change things. Maybe he would be different. But he only got worse. Started accusing me of infidelity, saying the baby could not be his. I never looked at another man, never even thought of it. But he would not believe me. Then one night he came home drunk and beat me so badly I thought I would lose the baby. The next morning, he threw me out. Just like that. 2 years of marriage ended with $50 and a death threat. "He ought to be horsewhipped," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He ought to be many things, but he has money and position, and I have neither. The law will not help a woman like me against a man like him." They rode on in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip of hoofbeats and the whisper of wind through grass. Grace found herself relaxing despite everything, the rhythm of the horse and the warmth of the sun working a kind of magic on her exhausted body. She had not felt this calm in months. "How far along are you?" Marcus asked eventually. 5 months. The baby should come in February, if I can keep myself and the child alive that long." "You will." There was a certainty in his voice that surprised her. "I will make sure of it." Grace twisted slightly to look at him, confused by his conviction. "You do not even know me. Does not matter. No woman should have to face what you are facing alone. No child should come into the world without someone to protect them. If that someone has to be me, then so be it." The simplicity of his statement, the utter conviction behind it, made Grace's throat tight with emotion. She turned forward again, blinking back tears. "I do not understand why you are doing this." "My mother died when I was young," Marcus said quietly. "She was sick, and there was no one to help her, no one who cared enough to try. My father tried his best, but he was just one man working a failing ranch, and he could not be in 2 places at once. I watched her fade away, watched her suffer, and I swore then that I would never stand by when someone needed help, not if I could do something about it." Grace absorbed this, understanding dawning. "I am sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago, but the lesson stuck." Marcus shifted in the saddle, adjusting his grip on the reins. "The Double R Ranch is a good place. Eleanor and Richard Thompson run it, been married 20 years. Eleanor cannot have children of her own, which has always grieved her. They are good people, though. Fair employers. They treat their hands right, pay honest wages. If anyone can help you find your feet, it will be them. And if they cannot, then we will figure something else out. But let us take it one step at a time." The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun touched the western peaks, bathing everything in liquid gold light. Grace saw a sprawling collection of buildings, a large 2-story house painted white with green shutters, several barns and outbuildings, corrals filled with horses and cattle. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and careful management. Her heart began to beat faster, anxiety mixing with hope in equal measure. Marcus guided Buck toward the main house, where a woman stood on the porch, shading her eyes against the setting sun. She was perhaps 45, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that showed laugh lines around her eyes and mouth. She wore a simple calico dress covered by an apron, and her expression shifted from curiosity to concern as she took in the sight of Marcus riding double with a pregnant woman. "Marcus Jameson, what have you brought home this time?" she called out, but there was warmth in her voice rather than censure. Marcus dismounted and then helped Grace down, steadying her when her legs wobbled from the long ride. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Grace Novak. I found her stranded at the trading post in Ogden. She needs help, and I thought you might be able to provide it, or at least point her in the right direction." Eleanor Thompson descended the porch steps with surprising speed, her eyes taking in every detail of Grace's appearance with the practiced assessment of a woman used to sizing up situations quickly. "Stranded, was she? Well, she looks half-starved and about to fall over. Marcus, take her bag to the guest room. Grace, dear, you come inside with me right now. When did you last eat?" The sudden efficiency of it, the way Eleanor simply took charge, left Grace momentarily speechless. "I had some bread yesterday morning," she managed. "Yesterday morning." Eleanor's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Well, we will fix that right now. Come along, dear. You can tell me your story once we get some food into you." Grace found herself ushered into the house, through a neat parlor, and into a warm kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and roasted meat. Eleanor sat her down at a large wooden table and immediately began assembling a plate of food, sliced beef and potatoes and carrots, thick bread with butter, a glass of fresh milk. Grace stared at it, overwhelmed by the simple abundance. "Eat," Eleanor commanded gently. "The baby needs it even if you do not think you do." Grace ate. She tried to pace herself, to eat slowly and properly, but hunger overtook manners, and she found herself devouring the food with a desperation that would have embarrassed her under other circumstances. Eleanor watched with satisfaction, then sat down across from her with a cup of coffee. "Now then," Eleanor said. "Marcus said you were stranded. What is your story, Grace Novak?" There was no judgment in her voice, just straightforward curiosity. Grace set down her fork and took a breath, then told her story again. It came easier the second time, though no less painful. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her face growing stormy as Grace described her husband's violence and abandonment. "That man should be shot," Eleanor said flatly when Grace finished, "and I would volunteer to do it myself. But that does not solve your immediate problem, does it? You need a place to stay and work to support yourself and that baby." "I can work," Grace said quickly. "I am strong, and I know how to cook and clean and sew. I worked in my father's store before I married. I know how to keep accounts, how to manage inventory. I will do anything you need, and I will not complain." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you would. As it happens, I could use help around here. Richard and I manage a dozen ranch hands, and feeding that many men 3 times a day is no small task. I have been after Richard for years to hire someone to help me in the kitchen, but he always said we could not afford it. Well, I think we can afford it now. I will give you room and board, plus $5 a week. It is not much, but it should let you save something for when the baby comes." Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks, hot and sudden. "I do not know what to say. Say yes, and then finish that milk. You are too thin by half, and I will not have you working yourself into the ground. You will take proper breaks, you will eat regular meals, and if that baby gives you any trouble, you will tell me immediately. I may not have children of my own, but I have helped deliver enough calves and foals to know when something is not right. Do we have an understanding?" "Yes," Grace whispered. "Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. No, thanks necessary. We help each other out here. That is how we survive." Eleanor stood and began clearing the dishes. "The guest room is upstairs, second door on the right. Marcus will have put your bag in there. You should rest tonight. Get your strength back. Tomorrow will be soon enough to start working. There is a basin and pitcher in the room. Towels in the cabinet. If you need anything, my room is at the end of the hall." Grace stood on shaky legs, overwhelmed by this sudden reversal of fortune. Just hours ago she had been standing alone and hopeless at the trading post. Now she had a job, a room, and most importantly, a chance. "I will not let you down, Mrs. Thompson." "I know you will not, dear. Now go on and rest. You look like you need it." Grace climbed the stairs slowly, her hand on the railing for support. The upstairs hallway was papered in a cheerful floral pattern, and the floorboards gleamed with polish. She found the guest room easily enough, a small but comfortable space with an iron-framed bed covered in a quilt, a washstand with the promised basin and pitcher, a wardrobe, and a rocking chair by the window. Her carpetbag sat on the bed, looking shabby against the clean linens. She washed her face and hands, marveling at the luxury of clean water and fresh towels. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, testing its softness, and nearly wept again at the simple comfort of it. A real bed, a safe place to sleep. Food in her belly, and the promise of more tomorrow. It was more than she had dared hope for. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Yes?" The door opened a crack, and Marcus peered in. "Just wanted to make sure you were settling in all right." Grace stood, smoothing her dress self-consciously. "Yes, thank you. Thank you for everything, Marcus. I do not know how to repay you." He stepped into the room, hat in hand, looking oddly uncomfortable now that they were inside and alone. "You do not owe me anything. I just did what anyone would do." "Most people did not," Grace pointed out. "Most people looked right through me like I was not there. You stopped. You helped. That means something." Marcus shrugged, embarrassed. "Well, I am glad Mrs. Thompson could give you work. She has been wanting help for a while now. You will like working with her. She is tough but fair, and she has a good heart." "She does." Grace hesitated, then added, "You do too." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Grace felt something pass between them, some acknowledgement of connection. It was not romantic, not yet, but it was real. Here was someone who had seen her at her worst, her most desperate, and had not turned away. That counted for something in this harsh world. "Get some rest," Marcus said softly. "Tomorrow is a new day." After he left, Grace changed into her nightgown, one of only two she owned, and climbed under the quilt. The bed was as comfortable as it looked, the mattress soft but supportive. Through the window she could see the last light fading from the sky, stars beginning to emerge in the vast darkness. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift and settle. "We are going to be all right," she whispered to the child growing inside her. "We found help. We found hope. Tomorrow we start building a new life." The baby kicked, as if in agreement, and Grace finally let herself smile. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without fear, without tears, just peaceful exhaustion and the tiniest seed of hope taking root in her heart. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost painting intricate patterns on the window glass. Grace woke to unfamiliar sounds, roosters crowing, cattle lowing, men's voices calling to each other in the yard below. For a moment she was disoriented, unable to place where she was. Then memory returned, along with a flood of relief so intense it was almost painful. She was safe. She had a job. She had a future, however uncertain. She dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a dark blue calico that had seen better days but was at least clean. Then she made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and frying bacon. The kitchen was already bustling. Eleanor stood at the massive cast-iron stove, tending multiple pans at once, while a young woman of perhaps 18 set the long table with plates and utensils. The girl looked up as Grace entered, her expression curious but friendly. "There you are," Eleanor said without turning around. "Grace, this is Molly Chapman. She comes in from her family's farm 3 days a week to help with laundry and heavy cleaning. Molly, this is Grace Novak. She will be helping me with the cooking and household management from now on." "Pleased to meet you," Molly said with a shy smile. She had red hair pulled back in braids and a scattering of freckles across her nose. "Mrs. Thompson has needed help for ages. The boys eat like they have hollow legs." "The boys eat like locusts," Eleanor corrected. "Grace, there is coffee in the pot and a cup in the cabinet. Pour yourself some, and then come help me with these eggs. The hands will be in any minute, and they expect their breakfast hot." Grace poured coffee with hands that only trembled slightly, then joined Eleanor at the stove. The older woman handed her a wooden spoon and nodded at a large pot of oatmeal. "Keep that stirred so it does not stick, and do not be nervous. The men are rough around the edges, but mostly harmless. They will stare because you are new and because you are pretty, but anyone who steps out of line will answer to me and to Richard, and they know it. Pretty." Grace could not remember the last time anyone had called her that. She stirred the oatmeal and tried not to think about a dozen strange men staring at her pregnant belly. The hands arrived in a rumble of boots and conversation, filing into the kitchen in a cloud of cold air and horse smell. They ranged in age from a grizzled man who looked to be in his 60s to a fresh-faced boy who could not have been more than 16. Marcus came in near the end of the group, nodding to Grace as he found a seat at the long table. Richard Thompson followed last, a tall man with silver-shot dark hair and the weathered face of someone who spent his life outdoors. His eyes were kind, though, and when he spotted Grace, he crossed to shake her hand formally. "Mrs. Novak, my wife tells me you will be joining our household. Welcome to the Double R. I hope you will be happy here. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I am grateful for the opportunity. We are grateful to have the help." He turned to address the table at large. "Men, this is Grace Novak. She will be assisting Eleanor with meals and household duties. I expect you all to treat her with respect and courtesy. Anyone who fails to do so will be looking for work elsewhere. Are we clear?" A rumble of assent went around the table. Grace felt multiple sets of eyes on her, but kept her attention on serving food. Eleanor had been right. The men ate like they had not seen food in days, plates emptied and refilled multiple times. But they were polite in their appetites, using please and thank you, passing dishes carefully. Several of them offered compliments on the food, though Grace had done little more than stir oatmeal and pour coffee. Marcus caught her eye once and smiled, a small private thing that made her feel less alone in the crowded kitchen. She found herself smiling back before she could think better of it. After breakfast, the men dispersed to their various duties, leaving Eleanor and Grace to clean up. Molly had disappeared to tackle the laundry, and the sudden quiet was almost startling after the noise of a dozen people eating. "You did well," Eleanor said as they washed dishes. "They liked you, I could tell. They were very polite. That is Richard's doing. He runs a tight ship, expects his men to act civilized. But they genuinely liked you. That will make things easier. Eleanor handed Grace a plate to dry. "Now, let me explain how things work around here. We serve breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, and supper at 6. Between meals, there is bread and butter and cold meat available for anyone who gets hungry. I bake bread 3 times a week, do the main laundry on Mondays with Molly's help, and try to keep this house from falling down around our ears. You will help with all of it, but especially the cooking. My joints are not what they used to be, and standing at that stove for hours on end is getting harder." They fell into a rhythm over the following days. Grace proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker, and Eleanor's initial assessment of her character was confirmed repeatedly. The girl had been through hell, but had not let it break her. She approached every task with determination and competence, whether it was kneading bread dough, scrubbing floors, or managing the complex logistics of feeding a small army 3 times a day. The ranch hands accepted her presence with varying degrees of comfort. Some, like old Tom Barker, who worked as the stable manager, adopted a grandfatherly protectiveness toward her. Others, like the younger Cowboys, treated her with awkward deference, unsure how to behave around a pregnant woman. But Marcus was different. He sought her out during breaks, struck up conversations while she worked in the kitchen garden, and made a point of thanking her after every meal. It was not intrusive, not pushy, just a steady presence that Grace found herself looking forward to. 2 weeks after her arrival, Marcus found her sitting on the back porch one evening after supper, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The air was crisp and cold, winter asserting itself, but she had wrapped herself in a shawl and seemed content to sit in the chill. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Grace looked up, surprised, but pleased. "Not at all." He settled onto the porch step beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a while they just sat in comfortable silence, watching the light drain from the sky and the stars emerge one by one. "You have settled in well," Marcus said eventually. "Eleanor sings your praises every chance she gets." "She has been wonderful to me. Everyone has. I still cannot quite believe my luck." "It is not luck. You work hard, you are good at what you do, and you are pleasant to be around. That counts for a lot." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "You did not have to help me that day at the trading post. Most people would not have." "I know, but I'm glad I did." She turned to look at him, studying his profile in the fading light. He had a strong face, honest and open, with none of the calculation or cruelty she had learned to recognize in her husband. "Why did you really? You said it was because someone should, but that is not the whole truth, is it?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "My father remarried when I was 15, he said finally. Woman named Catherine. She was pregnant when they married, not my father's child, but he took her in anyway because she had nowhere else to go. Her family had disowned her, the baby's father had run off, and she was facing a pretty bleak future. My father gave her his name and a home, and she gave him loyalty and partnership. They were happy together, really happy, right up until he died 5 years ago. Catherine lives in town now, runs a boarding house. I see her every few weeks, and she always tells me that my father saved her life by taking that chance. So, when I saw you standing there, desperate and alone, I thought about Catherine. I thought about the man my father was, and I tried to do what he would have done." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "That is a beautiful story. It is a true story. And it taught me that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on someone, from showing kindness when it is not expected or required." He glanced at her, his expression suddenly shy. "I am glad you are here, Grace. I am glad I stopped that day." "So am I," she whispered. Something shifted between them in that moment, some acknowledgement that this was becoming more than just kindness offered and gratefully received. Grace felt it like a tangible thing, warm and frightening in equal measure. She was pregnant with another man's child, abandoned and disgraced. She had no business feeling anything for Marcus Jameson beyond gratitude, and yet. The baby kicked, hard enough that Grace gasped and pressed her hand to her belly. Marcus's eyes went wide with concern. "Are you all right? Is something wrong?" No, the baby is just active tonight." Without thinking, she took his hand and placed it on her belly where the baby was moving. "Feel that?" Marcus froze, his hand warm and large against the curve of her stomach. Then his face lit up with wonder as he felt the baby kick beneath his palm. "Is that normal? Are they supposed to move that much?" Grace laughed, a real laugh, the first in longer than she could remember. "Yes, it is normal. The midwife in Salt Lake said it means the baby is healthy and strong. That is amazing. Marcus did not move his hand, just kept it there, feeling the baby move. A whole person, just growing in there, waiting to come into the world. Waiting to complicate my life even further, Grace said, but there was no bitterness in it, just tired acceptance, or waiting to make it better. Marcus met her eyes in the twilight. Children have a way of showing us what really matters. They sat like that for a while longer, his hand on her belly and hers covering his, until the cold drove them inside. But something had changed. Some barrier had been crossed. That night, lying in her bed, Grace let herself think about Marcus Jameson not as a rescuer or employer or friend, but as a man. A good man. A man who made her feel safe and valued and seen. It was too soon for such thoughts, her rational mind insisted. She was too damaged, too burdened, too broken. But her heart disagreed, whispering possibilities she had thought were lost to her forever. November gave way to December, and winter settled over the ranch in earnest. Snow fell in heavy curtains, covering the landscape in pristine white that made everything seem new and clean. The work did not stop, though. Animals still needed feeding, buildings needed maintaining, and a household of 14 needed 3 meals a day regardless of weather. Grace's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing rounder by the week. Eleanor fussed over her constantly, insisting she take frequent breaks and not lift anything heavy. The baby was active, a constant presence of kicks and rolls that Grace found both reassuring and occasionally uncomfortable. Marcus had taken to joining her for evening conversations on the porch, weather permitting, or in the warm kitchen when it did not. They talked about everything and nothing, his work on the ranch, her childhood in Salt Lake City, their favorite books, their dreams for the future. He told her stories about growing up on a failing ranch with a widowed father, about the lessons he had learned from hard times and harder work. She found herself opening up in ways she never had with her husband, sharing hopes and fears she had kept locked away. One evening in mid-December, after the dinner dishes had been cleared and the other hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Marcus asked her to walk with him to the barn. The snow had stopped earlier, leaving the world blanketed in quiet under a full moon that made everything glow silver. "There is something I want to show you," he said as they crunched through the snow. The barn was warm and dim, lit by a single lantern hanging from a beam. The horses shifted in their stalls, nickering softly at the intrusion. Marcus led her to the far end, where one of the draft horses had given birth a few days earlier. The foal was all legs and curiosity, investigating Grace's skirts with a velvet nose, while its mother looked on placidly. Grace laughed and stroked the baby's neck, marveling at how soft it was. "Eleanor said you have been worried," Marcus said quietly. "About the baby, about being a mother, about whether you can do this." Grace did not deny it. "I am terrified. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold barn. "Look at that foal, 3 days old and already walking, already curious about the world. Its mother did not have to read books or take classes or have everything perfect. She just loved it and protected it and made sure it had what it needed. That is all any mother can do. That is all your baby will need from you. It is not that simple. It is exactly that simple. You are strong, Grace. Stronger than you know. You survived an abusive husband. You survived being thrown out with nothing. You survived despair and loneliness and fear. You will survive being a mother, too. And you will not be alone. Eleanor and Richard will help. I will help. Everyone on this ranch will help. Because that is what we do. We take care of our own." Grace looked up at him, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "Why do you care so much? About me? About my baby? We are not your responsibility." "Maybe I want you to be," Marcus said softly. Then, as if realizing how that sounded, he rushed to clarify. "I mean, not as a burden or an obligation, but I care about you, Grace. I admire your strength, your determination, your kindness despite everything you have been through. I look forward to seeing you every day. I think about you when I am working, and I know it is too soon. I know you have been through hell, and the last thing you need is some cowboy complicating your life. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that you matter, To me, you matter." Grace felt her heart hammering in her chest. "Marcus, I am pregnant with another man's child. I am damaged goods. I have nothing to offer you. You have everything to offer. You are smart and capable and beautiful. And the fact that some fool could not see that does not change the truth of it." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek in his hand. "I am not asking you for anything. Grace, I am just telling you how I feel. What you do with that information is entirely up to you." She should pull away. She should tell him this was impossible, that she could not think about such things, that her life was too complicated for romance. But instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, starved for gentleness after so many months of cruelty. "I care about you too," she whispered, "more than I should, more than is wise." "Then maybe we can be unwise together." Marcus smiled, that slow, warm smile that made her feel like the sun had come out. "We do not have to rush anything. We do not have to define anything. But maybe we can see where this goes, one day at a time." "One day at a time," Grace repeated. It seemed like something she could manage, something that did not require her to have all the answers right now. Marcus leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, chaste and sweet. "Come on, let us get you back inside before you freeze." They walked back to the house hand in hand, a simple gesture that felt momentous. Eleanor was waiting in the kitchen, darning socks by lamplight, and her knowing smile suggested she had guessed what had transpired. But she said nothing, just bid them both good night and went upstairs. December deepened into the darkest part of winter. The ranch work became harder, more focused on survival than profit. Pipes froze and had to be thawed. Stock had to be checked constantly to ensure none had been caught in drifts. The wood supply had to be maintained so the house and bunkhouse stayed warm. Through it all, Grace and Marcus grew closer. He carved her a rocking chair for the baby, spending his evenings in the barn workshop, shaping smooth pine and fitting joints with careful precision. She knitted him a scarf, her stitches growing more even with practice. They were courting, she realized, though neither of them had used the word. Old-fashioned courting, proper and patient, giving her space to heal while promising he would be there when she was ready. Christmas came, and with it a celebration that took Grace by surprise. She had expected a quiet acknowledgement of the holiday, maybe a special meal. Instead, Eleanor and Richard transformed the house into a wonderland of pine boughs and candles, and the entire ranch gathered for a feast that lasted hours. There were gifts exchanged, simple things carved from wood or knitted from wool, but given with genuine affection. Marcus gave her the finished rocking chair, and she cried as she sat in it, feeling it rock smooth and perfect beneath her. She gave him the scarf, watching him wrap it around his neck with obvious pleasure. "This is the best Christmas I have had in years," she told him later, as they stood on the porch watching snow fall in fat, lazy flakes. "It is the best Christmas I have ever had," he replied, and kissed her properly for the first time, slow and careful and full of promise. January brought brutally cold weather and a crisis. One of the younger hands, Johnny Miles, took sick with pneumonia. Eleanor and Grace took turns nursing him, keeping him warm and hydrated, forcing willow bark tea down his throat to fight the fever. For 3 days they were not sure he would survive. Then, on the 4th morning, his fever broke, and he opened his eyes clear for the first time, asking weakly for food. Grace sat by his bedside, spooning broth into him, and felt a fierce satisfaction. She had helped save him. Her knowledge of herbs and healing, learned from her mother, had made a difference. It was a small thing, but it mattered. She mattered. Marcus found her afterward, exhausted and swaying on her feet, and guided her to a chair. "You did good," he said, kneading the tension from her shoulders. "You saved his life." "We saved his life, all of us together. Still, you were amazing." His hand stilled, and his voice dropped lower. "Grace, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." She turned to look at him, suddenly nervous. "What is it?" "Your baby is due in a month, maybe less. After that, you are going to need to make some decisions about your future. I know you plan to keep working here, and Eleanor will let you because she has a good heart, but I want you to consider another option." He took a deep breath, and Grace saw that his hands were trembling slightly. "Marry me. Not because you have to, not because you have no other choice, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you. I want to be a father to your baby, to give them my name and my protection. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you, build a home with you, face whatever comes with you by my side." Grace stared at him, overwhelmed. "Marcus, you cannot mean that. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave and kind and strong. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know you make me laugh and make me think and make me want to be a better man. I know that I have fallen completely in love with you, and I am not going to apologize for it or pretend it is not true." He took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "I know this is fast. I know you have been hurt. I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I also know that sometimes love does not wait for the perfect time or the perfect circumstances. Sometimes it just happens, and you have to decide whether to embrace it or let it slip away. What about the baby? My baby is another man's child? Your baby will be our child. From the moment they are born, they will be mine in every way that matters. I will teach them to ride and rope. I will protect them and provide for them and love them with everything I have. Their biological father threw away something precious. I am not going to make the same mistake." Tears were streaming down Grace's face now, hot and fast. "I do not deserve you. You deserve everything, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." He slid off the chair and onto one knee, still holding her hands. "Grace Novak, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and the father of your child? Will you give me the honor of building a life with you?" She should say no. She should tell him he was making a terrible mistake. She should protect him from the complications and judgment that would come with marrying a pregnant widow, or worse. But looking into his face, seeing the love and hope and determination there, she could not bring herself to refuse. Because the truth was, she loved him too, had loved him for weeks now, though she had been too afraid to admit it even to herself. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Marcus surged to his feet and pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly, and kissed her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at once. "We should tell Eleanor and Richard," Grace said, wiping her eyes. "Let us tell them in the morning. Right now, I just want to sit here with you and believe that this is really happening." They sat together on the porch steps despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket, talking about the future in hushed, excited voices. They would marry as soon as the minister could come out from town, before the baby arrived. They would build a small house on ranch land that Richard had promised to deed them as a wedding gift. Marcus would continue working as a ranch hand while Grace helped Eleanor, at least until the baby was old enough to need less constant attention. It was not a grand life, not wealthy or easy, but it was theirs. That was what mattered. Eleanor and Richard were delighted when they heard the news the next morning. Eleanor hugged Grace so hard she could barely breathe, tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," she kept saying. "I knew from the first day that you two were meant for each other. Oh, this is wonderful. We must start planning immediately. The baby is due in a month, so we should have the wedding within the week if possible." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Richard rode to town to fetch the minister and arrange for the necessary paperwork. Eleanor threw herself into wedding preparations, with the fervor of a general planning a campaign. She had been saving her own wedding dress for the daughter she never had, and though it needed significant alteration to fit Grace's pregnant figure, she insisted on using it. Molly and her mother came to help with the sewing, and the three women worked late into the night by lamplight, adjusting seams and letting out panels. The ranch hands pitched in with enthusiasm. Tom Barker cleaned and polished the parlor until it shone. Johnny Miles, still weak from his illness but recovering, made wreaths of evergreen boughs to decorate the house. The younger cowboys rode out to a canyon they knew and brought back armloads of winter berries for decoration. Even the taciturn cook from the bunkhouse volunteered to make a wedding cake, his first attempt at something so fancy. Marcus was a bundle of nervous energy, checking and rechecking everything, making sure the small house Richard had promised them was ready for occupation, shopping for furniture and supplies in town. He came back with a cradle he had bought from a furniture maker, simple pine but beautifully made, and Grace had to sit down because her knees went weak looking at it. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in late January in the Thompsons' parlor with all the ranch hands and several families from neighboring spreads in attendance. Snow fell outside, but inside it was warm and bright with candles and firelight. Grace wore Eleanor's altered dress, cream-colored silk that had yellowed slightly with age but was still beautiful. Eleanor had woven winter berries into her hair, and Molly had lent her a cameo brooch that had belonged to her grandmother. Marcus stood at the front of the room in his best suit, his hair slicked back and his face clean-shaven, looking so handsome Grace's breath caught. When she walked to meet him, his eyes filled with tears that he blinked back rapidly. The minister, a weathered man named Reverend Hutchins, who served several rural communities on a rotating basis, kept the ceremony simple but heartfelt. He spoke of love and commitment, of the covenant of marriage and the blessing of family. When he asked if Marcus would take Grace to be his wife, Marcus said, "I do," in a voice that rang clear and certain through the room. When he asked if Grace would take Marcus to be her husband, she said, "I do," and meant it with her whole heart. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride." Marcus cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently, sweetly, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. Grace kissed him back, tasting salt from tears she had not realized she was crying, and felt something inside her that had been broken for so long begin to heal. The celebration afterward was joyous and loud, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Grace found herself passed from person to person, receiving hugs and congratulations from people who had become family over the past 3 months. Eleanor held her close and whispered, "Be happy, my dear. You deserve it." Richard shook Marcus's hand and told him he was a lucky man. Tom Barker got slightly drunk and made a rambling toast about love and second chances that left half the room in tears. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Marcus scooped Grace up in his arms, making her squeal with surprise, and carried her out to their new home. It was a short walk from the main house, close enough to be convenient, but far enough to provide privacy. The house was small, just 3 rooms downstairs and a sleeping loft above, but it was clean and warm, and theirs. Marcus set her down carefully in the main room, which served as kitchen and living space combined. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and someone, probably Eleanor, had left a pot of stew warming and fresh bread wrapped in a cloth. The cradle stood ready near the fireplace, waiting for its occupant. Their few possessions had already been moved in, and the space had been made cozy with rugs and curtains and touches that spoke of careful thought. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jameson," Marcus said softly. Mrs. Jameson. Grace turned the name over in her mind, testing it. She had been Mrs. Novak for 2 years, a title that had come to represent pain and fear, but Mrs. Jameson felt different. It felt like hope. "Welcome home," she echoed, and pulled her husband down for a kiss. That night they lay together in the bed that dominated the loft, wrapped in quilts in each other's arms. They had not consummated the marriage, not with the baby so close to arriving, but they held each other close and talked in quiet voices about the future they would build together. "Are you happy?" Marcus asked, his hand resting gently on her belly, where the baby was doing somersaults. "I am happy," Grace said, and realized it was true. Despite everything she had been through, despite all the pain and fear and loss, she had found her way to this moment. She had found love and safety and home. "I cannot believe how much my life has changed. 3 months ago, I was standing at that trading post, certain I was going to die. Now I am married to the best man I have ever known. I have a home and work I enjoy, and I am about to become a mother. It does not seem real? It is real. I promise you it is real, and it is only going to get better from here." Marcus pressed a kiss to her temple. "I am going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "I could never regret it. You saved me, Marcus. You gave me back my life. You saved yourself. I just happened to be there at the right time." He shifted slightly, pulling her closer. "But I am grateful every day that I was. I cannot imagine my life without you now." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, the baby moving gently between them like a promise of the future waiting to unfold. 3 weeks later, on a frigid February night with wind howling around the eaves, Grace went into labor. It started with an ache in her lower back that she tried to ignore, not wanting to worry Marcus unnecessarily, but the ache grew steadily worse, radiating around to her belly in waves that made her catch her breath. Marcus noticed immediately. "Grace, what is wrong?" "I think the baby is coming." Whatever color Marcus had drained from his face. "Now? But it is the middle of the night. There is a storm outside. The midwife is in town. She cannot possibly get here in time. Then Eleanor will have to do. Grace gripped his hand as another contraction rolled through her. Marcus, I need you to stay calm. Go get Eleanor and Richard. Tell them it is time. And then boil water and get clean linens, lots of them. Can you do that? He nodded, looking terrified but determined, and bolted out into the night. Grace heard him shouting for the Thompsons, heard Eleanor's voice raised in response. Then they were there, Eleanor taking charge with the calm efficiency of someone who had helped bring countless animals into the world, Richard hovering anxiously until Eleanor sent him to help Marcus. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Grace had known it would hurt, but the reality exceeded anything she could have imagined. Wave after wave of pain rolled through her, so intense that she could not think, could not breathe, could only endure. Eleanor stayed by her side the entire time, coaching her through contractions, wiping her face with cool cloths, telling her she was doing well, that she was strong, that it would be over soon. Marcus was there too, holding her hand, letting her squeeze until she thought she might break his fingers. He did not complain, did not flinch, just stayed solid and present while she worked through the hardest thing she had ever done. Finally, as afternoon light began to filter through the window, Eleanor told her to push. Grace bore down with everything she had, past pain and exhaustion into some primal place where nothing mattered except bringing this baby into the world. She felt the baby move, felt the impossible pressure and stretch, felt something give way. And then, suddenly the pressure released and she heard it, the thin wail of a newborn baby crying. Grace collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face, while Eleanor worked quickly with the cord and blankets. "It is a boy," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "A healthy, beautiful boy." She cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Grace's arms. Grace looked down at her son and felt her heart crack open. He was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved indignantly in the air. His eyes opened, unfocused but searching, and she felt a love so fierce and protective that it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Marcus leaned over her shoulder, staring at the baby with wonder. "He is beautiful. Grace, he is so beautiful." "He is." Grace looked up at her husband, this man who had promised to be a father to another man's child, and saw the love in his face. "Do you want to hold him?" Marcus nodded mutely, and Grace carefully transferred the baby into his arms. He held the infant like he was made of glass, supporting the head carefully, staring down at the tiny face with an expression of such tenderness that Grace felt tears well up again. "Hello, son," Marcus said softly. "I am your father, and I promise you, I am going to take care of you and your mother for the rest of my life. You are safe. You are loved. You are wanted. Always." The baby made a small sound, and one tiny hand wrapped around Marcus's finger. Grace watched her husband fall completely in love with her son, and knew without doubt that they were going to be all right. More than all right. They were going to be a family. They named him Daniel Thomas Jameson. Daniel for Grace, and Thomas for old Tom Barker, who had shown them both such kindness. The ranch celebrated his arrival with the same enthusiasm they had shown for the wedding. Eleanor knitted booties and caps. The Cowboys carved toys and whittled rattles. Molly's mother sent over a stack of cloth diapers she had sewn. The bunkhouse cook made a cake with "Welcome Baby Daniel" written across the top in uneven letters. The first few weeks were exhausting. Daniel nursed constantly, cried frequently, and slept only in short bursts. Grace walked miles back and forth across the small house at all hours, rocking and soothing and learning the rhythms of her son. But Marcus was there through all of it, getting up for night feedings even though he had to be at work at dawn, changing diapers without complaint, singing off key lullabies that somehow worked better than Grace's more melodious attempts. Slowly, they found their rhythm as a family. Daniel began sleeping for longer stretches. Grace's body healed. Marcus settled into fatherhood with a natural ease that amazed everyone who knew him. He would come home from long days of ranch work and immediately reach for his son, spending his evenings holding Daniel and talking to him about horses and cattle and the wide world he would grow up to explore. Winter gave way to spring, and Grace found herself falling in love with Utah in a way she never had before. The mountains lost their snowcaps, revealing green slopes dotted with wildflowers. The ranch came alive with new calves and foals and the constant activity of planting and preparation. She returned to helping Eleanor with meals, bringing Daniel with her in a basket that stayed in the kitchen where she could keep an eye on him. The hands adored the baby. Tom Barker would hold him and tell him stories about the old days. Johnny Miles made him a mobile of carved animals that hung over his cradle. Even the gruffest of the cowboys would stop to coo over him, their rough faces softening at the sight of his toothless smiles. On a warm evening in May, Grace and Marcus sat on their porch watching Daniel wave his arms at fireflies while the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. The baby was 4 months old, healthy and happy. Growing so fast, Grace could hardly believe it. "I have been thinking," Marcus said, "about the future." Grace looked at him curiously. "What about it?" "Richard offered me a promotion today. He wants me to take over as foreman when Tom retires at the end of summer. It comes with better pay and a larger house, the one that sits up on the hill overlooking the valley. It has 4 bedrooms, Grace. Room for Daniel to grow, room for more children if we are blessed with them, room for a real life." Grace felt excitement bubble up inside her. "Marcus, that is wonderful. You should absolutely accept. I wanted to make sure you agreed before I said yes. It means more responsibility for me, longer hours sometimes. But it also means stability, a real future for our family." "We are already living a real future," Grace said, reaching over to take his hand. "But I would love to have more space, and you have earned this promotion 10 times over. Richard is lucky to have you." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I am the lucky one. Every day I wake up next to you, every time I hold our son, I think about how different my life could have been, how empty it was before you came into it. I love you, Grace, more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I love you too. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You gave me hope and home and family. You are the best man I have ever known, Marcus Jameson, and I thank God every day that you stopped at that trading post." They kissed as the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, Daniel babbling happily between them, and Grace felt a peace so complete it was almost overwhelming. Her past was behind her, full of pain, but also lessons that had made her stronger. Her present was filled with love and purpose, and her future stretched out bright with possibility. The years unfolded like chapters in the best kind of story. Marcus took over as foreman and proved himself more than capable, earning the respect of the hands and the trust of Richard and Eleanor. The family moved into the foreman's house on the hill, and Grace spent happy months making it into a home, sewing curtains and planting a garden and arranging furniture until every room felt exactly right. Daniel grew from a baby into a toddler, then a boy, curious and fearless and full of laughter. He had Marcus's smile and Grace's dark hair, and everyone who met him commented on what a happy child he was. By the time he was 2, he was following Marcus around the ranch, imitating everything his father did with the intense concentration of early childhood. Grace and Marcus welcomed a second child when Daniel was 3, a daughter they named Rose Marie. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn determination, and from the moment she was born, she owned everyone around her. Daniel was protective of his baby sister, showing her his toys and bringing her flowers he picked from Grace's garden. 2 years later came another son, James William, who was quiet where his siblings were loud, thoughtful where they were impulsive. And then, when Grace was 32 and certain they were done having children, came twin daughters, Emma and Sarah, identical in appearance but opposites in temperament. The house on the hill rang with the sound of children laughing and arguing and playing. Grace's days were full to bursting with cooking and cleaning and tending to scraped knees and hurt feelings and endless questions about how the world worked. But she loved every exhausting minute of it. This was the life she had dreamed of during those dark days when she thought she had no future. This chaos and joy and love was everything she had never dared hope for. Marcus proved to be an extraordinary father. He was patient and firm in equal measure, teaching his children not just how to ride and rope, but how to be kind, how to work hard, how to treat others with respect. He included Daniel fully in ranch work as the boy grew older, never once treating him as anything less than his own son. When Daniel asked at age 10 why his last name was different from what appeared on his birth certificate, Marcus sat him down and told him the truth, carefully and honestly. "You have two fathers," Marcus said. "The man who helped make you and the man who chose to raise you. One gave you life, and I am grateful to him for that. But I am the one who gets to watch you grow up, who gets to teach you things, who gets to be proud of the man you are becoming. And I am proud, Daniel, every single day." Daniel had hugged him fiercely and said, "You are my real dad. You are the only one that matters." It was one of those moments that reminded Grace why she had fallen in love with Marcus Jameson, why she thanked whatever providence had put them in the same place at the same time. The ranch prospered under Marcus's management. He implemented new techniques he had read about, improved the breeding stock, and built relationships with buyers that ensured fair prices for their cattle and horses. Richard Thompson grew older and began stepping back, content to let Marcus handle more and more of the daily operations. When Richard died peacefully in his sleep at age 73, it was sad but not tragic. He had lived a good life and left behind a legacy he could be proud of. Eleanor continued on, a fixture at the main house, increasingly relying on Grace not just for help, but for companionship. The two women had become as close as mother and daughter, bound by shared experience and genuine affection. Eleanor doted on Grace's children, and they adored her in return, calling her Grandma Eleanor, and bringing her flowers and sitting at her feet to listen to her stories. When Eleanor passed away 5 years after Richard, leaving the ranch to Marcus and Grace in her will, Grace grieved deeply. But she also felt profound gratitude for the gift Eleanor had given her. Not just material security, but proof that kindness existed in the world, that people could be good and generous for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. Running the ranch was a massive responsibility, but Marcus and Grace rose to the challenge. They hired additional hands, built new buildings, expanded their herds. Grace managed the books and correspondence while Marcus handled the practical side of ranching. They made decisions together, equal partners in the enterprise, and their combined strengths made the Double R one of the most successful operations in the territory. Daniel grew into a strong, capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. At 18, he took on more responsibility, managing cattle drives and supervising hands with a maturity beyond his years. When a pretty young woman named Hannah Wright moved to Ogden with her family, Daniel courted her with the same patient determination Marcus had shown Grace, and at 20, he married her in a ceremony at the ranch. Grace cried through the entire wedding, remembering her own desperate circumstances so many years before, and marveling at the confident, happy man her son had become. This was what she had fought for during those dark months of her pregnancy, the chance to give her child a good life. And she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. Rose married at 22, a teacher from town who made her laugh and supported her love of reading. James took over managing the ranch's breeding program, developing a reputation for producing quality horses. The twins were still young, 16 and full of ideas about their futures, arguing good-naturedly about whether to stay in Utah or seek adventure elsewhere. One evening in late summer, Grace and Marcus sat on the porch of the house on the hill, watching the sun set over land they had worked for 3 decades. They were in their 50s now, weathered by years of hard work, but still strong, still healthy, still deeply in love. "Do you ever think about that day at the trading post?" Marcus asked. "The day we met?" "Sometimes," Grace admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to someone else." "In a way, it did. You are not the same person you were then." "Neither are you." Marcus smiled. "No, I suppose not. We have both grown and changed, but some things have stayed the same. I still love you as much as I did the day I married you. More, actually, because now I know all your faults and I love you anyway." Grace laughed and swatted his arm. "My faults? You are the one who leaves muddy boots by the door. And you are the one who rearranges the barn every few months just to drive me crazy. Someone has to keep things organized." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands like they had on so many evenings over the years. In the distance, they could see the main ranch buildings, the corrals, the new barn Marcus had built 5 years ago. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. Horses grazed in the far pasture. Everything they had built together, everything they had fought for and worked for and dreamed of. "I have no regrets," Grace said suddenly, "about any of it. The pain I went through, the fear, the desperation, it was all worth it because it led me here. It led me to you. I have no regrets either. except maybe that I did not find you sooner, that we did not have even more years together." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. "We have had 32 years. That is more than many people get." "And I will take every single one I can get," Marcus said. "Every day with you is a gift, Grace Jameson, the best gift I have ever received." They watched the sun disappear behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The evening star appeared, bright and steady in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of the twins laughing about something, their voices high and happy. In the barn, Daniel was probably checking on the pregnant mare. At the main house, Rose and her husband were visiting for the weekend, their own children running wild with their cousins. This was the life Grace had built from nothing, from desperation and fear, and one cowboy's kindness at a dusty trading post. She had been pregnant and alone, and certain she would die. Instead, she had lived, she had loved. She had created a family and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. "I have nowhere," she had whispered that day, and Marcus had given her somewhere, more than somewhere. He had given her everywhere that mattered, a home, a family, a future, and a love that had sustained her through every challenge and triumph of the past 3 decades. As the stars emerged one by one overhead, Marcus pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Come on, let us go inside. I think the twins are making dinner tonight, which means we should probably supervise before they burn down the kitchen." Grace laughed and let him pull her to her feet. They walked inside together, hand in hand, into the warm light and happy chaos of their family home. Behind them, the Utah night settled over the ranch, peaceful and perfect, holding within it the story of 2 people who had found each other when both needed it most, and had built something beautiful from the ashes of a difficult past. Their love story had started with a simple question and a desperate answer. It had grown through patience and kindness and mutual respect into something that could weather any storm. And it would continue, Grace knew, for whatever time they had left, and then beyond, in the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. She had been pregnant and left at a trading post, with no hope and no future. A cowboy had asked where she was headed, and she had whispered that she had nowhere. But he had given her somewhere. He had given her everything, and together they had built a life worth living, a love worth having, a story worth telling. That was more than Grace had ever dreamed possible, and it was everything she would ever need. Years continued to pass with the measured pace of seasons turning. The ranch thrived under their stewardship, becoming a respected name throughout Utah territory. Marcus's reputation for fairness and competence brought them opportunities to expand, to partner with other ranchers, to become pillars of the community. Grace became known not just as Marcus's capable wife, but as a woman of business acumen in her own right, managing accounts and investments with a shrewdness that impressed bankers and businessmen alike. The children scattered and gathered as children do, building their own lives while remaining connected to the land that raised them. Daniel and Hannah built a house on ranch property and gave Grace her first grandchildren, 3 boys who tore around the place with the same wild energy their father had shown. Rose and her husband moved back to Utah after several years away, and she took over managing the ranch's books when Grace wanted to step back slightly. James never married, but seemed content managing the horses, living in the foreman's cottage and spending his evenings reading by lamplight. The twins went off to Salt Lake City together, Emma to study at the university, and Sarah to apprentice with a dressmaker. They came home regularly, bringing stories of city life that seemed exotic to their ranch-raised siblings. Eventually, Emma married a doctor and moved to Denver, while Sarah returned home to open a dressmaking business in Ogden, becoming successful enough to employ 3 assistants. Through all the changes, through the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who eventually came, through good years and hard years and everything in between, Grace and Marcus remained at the center. They were the foundation upon which everything else was built, the example their children pointed to when explaining what marriage should look like, the love story people in Ogden told when they wanted to believe in happy endings. When Grace turned 60, Marcus threw her a party that brought together seemingly everyone they had ever known. The ranch house overflowed with family and friends, with neighbors and business associates and cowhands both current and retired. There was food and music and dancing, speeches and toasts and laughter. Grace stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, leaning against the husband who had stood by her side for 38 years, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I never imagined this," she said to Marcus as they swayed together, to music being played by one of their grandsons and his friends. "That day at the trading post, I could not have imagined any of this." "I could," Marcus said. "The moment I saw you, I knew you were something special. I knew if you had the chance, you would do extraordinary things. We did them together." "Always together," Marcus agreed. "That was the promise I made you, and I have kept it." He had. Through illness and injury, through drought and plenty, through the everyday challenges of running a ranch and raising a family, they had faced everything as partners. They had argued sometimes, disagreed on decisions, struggled with problems that seemed insurmountable, but they had never stopped loving each other, never stopped choosing each other, never stopped believing in the partnership they had forged in those early, desperate days. When Grace turned 65, she convinced Marcus to travel. They took a train to San Francisco, saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time, marveled at the size and scope of the world beyond Utah. Then they went east, visiting Denver and Chicago, seeing cities that made Ogden look like the frontier outpost it had once been. But after 6 weeks away, they were both ready to come home, to the mountain views and wide sky and the land that had shaped them. "I missed the ranch," Marcus admitted as they rode back from the train station. "Missed waking up to mountain air and the sound of cattle. Missed knowing every person we passed and them knowing us." "I missed our family," Grace said. "Missed the grandchildren. Missed the rhythm of ranch life. It was wonderful to travel, but this is home. This will always be home." They settled back into routine, though with fewer responsibilities now that their children had taken over much of the day-to-day work. They spent their days however they pleased, Marcus riding out to check fences and herds, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Grace tending her garden and meeting with the women's society in town and doting on the ever-growing brood of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. On their 40th anniversary, their children arranged a celebration at the church in Ogden. The entire town seemed to turn out, wanting to honor the couple who had become synonymous with hard work, fair dealing, and enduring love. The minister spoke about the example they set, about how their marriage had blessed not just their own family, but the entire community. Their children and grandchildren offered speeches, some funny and some tearful, all of them expressing gratitude for the parents and grandparents who had given them such a strong foundation. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood slowly, his joints protesting after so many years of hard physical work. But his voice was still strong, his mind still sharp. He took Grace's hand and looked out at the assembled crowd. 40 years ago, he said, I was riding into Ogden to buy supplies. I had no idea that trip would change my life forever. I saw a woman standing alone at the trading post, and something told me to stop, to ask if she needed help. That simple decision, that moment of listening to instinct, brought me the greatest blessing of my life. Grace was pregnant and desperate, with nowhere to go and no one to help her. But she was also strong and brave and determined to survive. All she needed was a chance. I gave her that chance, and she gave me everything else: love, partnership, family, purpose, joy. She made me a better man. She made my life worth living, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. There was not a dry eye in the church. Grace stood and embraced her husband, and the crowd erupted in applause that went on and on. When it finally quieted, Grace found her own voice. I was lost, she said simply, broken and frightened and certain I had no future. Marcus saw me anyway. He saw past the circumstances to the person I could be if someone just believed in me. He offered me hope when I had none, kindness when the world had shown me only cruelty. He became my husband, the father of my children, my partner in every sense of the word. He is the best man I have ever known, and loving him has been the honor of my life. The celebration continued late into the evening, but eventually Marcus and Grace slipped away, walking slowly back to the house on the hill. They moved more carefully now, their bodies showing the wear of 7 decades of life. But they still walked hand in hand, still sought each other's company, still loved with the same depth and intensity they had felt as newlyweds. As they stood on their porch looking out over the moonlit ranch, Grace thought about the journey that had brought them here. All the pain and struggle, all the joy and triumph, all the ordinary days that had woven together into an extraordinary life. She thought about that terrified girl at the trading post, and she wished she could go back and tell her, "Hold on, help is coming. Your story is not over. In fact, it is just beginning." "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, his arm around her waist. "Everything," Grace said. "Our whole life together. How far we have come. How blessed we have been." "We have been very blessed," Marcus agreed. "More than we probably deserved." "We deserved it," Grace said firmly. "We worked for it. We built it together from nothing. We earned every bit of happiness we found." Marcus kissed her temple. "You are right, we did, and I would not change a single moment of it." They stood together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something lasting. Around them, the ranch they had created hummed with quiet life, horses breathing in the barn, cattle settling for the night, families sleeping in houses scattered across the property. This was their legacy, not just land and buildings, but the love and values they had instilled in generations. Grace thought about Daniel, grown into a man who treated his wife and children with the same respect and devotion Marcus had always shown her. She thought about Rose and her fierce independence, Emma and her dedication to healing, Sarah and her artistic vision, James and his quiet competence. She thought about the grandchildren learning to ride and rope, to plant and harvest, to work hard and love well, all of them carrying forward the lessons she and Marcus had taught, creating their own stories while honoring the foundation they stood on. This was what she had been fighting for that day at the trading post, though she had not known it then. Not just survival, but this: family, love, legacy, a life lived fully and well, shared with someone who saw her as she truly was and loved her anyway. "Come inside," Marcus said gently. "It is getting cold." They went inside together, into the house they had filled with 40 years of memories, and prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage. As they lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, Grace felt profound peace. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Marcus replied. "Always have, always will." They drifted off to sleep, two souls intertwined so completely that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. And the ranch settled into night around them, solid and enduring, a testament to what two people could build when they had faith in each other and refused to give up. The years that followed were gentle. Marcus and Grace both slowed down, age finally catching up with them. But they remained active and engaged, spending time with family, offering advice when asked, watching with pride as their children and grandchildren continued the work they had started. When Marcus fell ill at 78, Grace was by his side constantly, just as he had been by hers through 5 pregnancies and various ailments over the years. The doctor said his heart was giving out, that there was nothing to be done but make him comfortable. Grace moved his bed to the parlor so he could look out at the mountains he loved, and she sat with him for hours, holding his hand and reminiscing about their life together. "No regrets," Marcus said one afternoon, his voice weak but certain. "Not a single one." "No regrets," Grace agreed, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me the most beautiful life, Marcus Jameson. Thank you. Thank you for trusting me that day. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for 45 years of loving me." He squeezed her hand with what strength he had left. "Promise me you will keep living, Grace. Do not waste time grieving. Our life together was too full of joy to end in sorrow." "I promise," she whispered. He died peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, with Grace holding his hand. The funeral drew hundreds of people, all of them coming to pay respects to a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. Grace stood straight and dry, eyed through the service, honoring his request not to waste their beautiful story on excessive grief. But at night, alone in the bed they had shared for 45 years, she wept for the loss of him. Not regretful tears, not bitter tears, but tears of love and gratitude for the gift his life had been. She had known such joy with him, such partnership and passion and peace. The world seemed dimmer without him in it. Yet she kept her promise. She kept living, kept engaging with family, kept finding joy in grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told stories about Marcus, keeping his memory alive, making sure the youngest children knew the kind of man their great-grandfather had been. She became the matriarch of the family, the keeper of history, the living link to the ranch's founding. On her 80th birthday, her children threw her a celebration. 3 generations gathered, more than 60 people who carried her and Marcus's blood, plus spouses and friends who had become family. They filled the house on the hill with laughter and food and music, and Grace moved among them, hugging and blessing and marveling at all they had become. Daniel, now in his late 50s with grandchildren of his own, gave a speech. "My mother," he said, "is the strongest person I know. She survived things that would have broken most people. She built a life from nothing, raised us with love and discipline, partnered with my father to create everything you see around you. She taught us that kindness matters, that hard work pays off, that family is everything. She taught us to face fear with courage and meet hardship with determination. Most of all, she taught us how to love well and completely. Everything I am, everything good in my life, comes from her example." Grace cried then, letting the tears fall freely. To be loved like this, honored like this, to know that her life had mattered, that her choices had created ripples that would continue long after she was gone, it was more than she had ever hoped for. She lived 4 more years, remaining sharp and engaged until the end. On a spring morning when she was 84, she died peacefully in her sleep, in the house she and Marcus had made into a home, surrounded by the love they had built together. They buried her next to Marcus on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and the entire community came to mourn and celebrate her life. The minister spoke of her journey from desperation to triumph, of the example she had set, of the family she had built. Her children and grandchildren shared memories, painting a picture of a woman who had been tested by life and had emerged victorious through sheer will and the love of a good man. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story Grace and Marcus had started. The house on the hill remained, solid and enduring, a reminder of what could be built when 2 people refused to give up on each other or on hope. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set behind the mountains in shades of gold and purple, family members swore they could feel their presence, a weathered cowboy and a desperate woman who had found each other against all odds and had created something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. Their love story had become legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that kindness mattered, that hope survived, and that sometimes, when you had nowhere to go, a stranger's compassion could change everything. Grace had been pregnant and left at a trading post in Ogden, Utah in 1882, certain her story was ending. Marcus had asked where she was headed, and she had whispered that she had nowhere, but he had given her somewhere. He had given her everywhere. And together they had built not just a ranch, but a legacy of love that would ripple through time, touching lives they would never meet, proving that the best stories, the truest stories, were the ones where broken people found each other and decided to build something whole. Their story was complete now, every thread woven, every promise kept, every hope fulfilled. It was a life well lived, a love well earned, a family well raised, and a legacy that would endure for generations. And that was the best ending anyone could hope for. Not perfect, but real, not easy, but worth it, not without pain, but ultimately defined by joy and love and the courage it took to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through everything life threw at them. That was the story of Grace and Marcus Jameson, and it was a story worth telling.